just because I don't want you to talk very long here. My name is Jenny Williams. I'm the program director for the League of Women Voters of New Mexico. There's a lot of feedback here.
I'm not going to talk very long anyway.
That's better.
I'm just introducing the thing, and I wanted to say we don't have handouts today. There's the legislative almanac from last year down the street. I think Dick Mason's getting copies of it, but you can pick them up on your way out. If you want materials such as Senator Wirth's 10-point and various other pieces of information that we have but did not bring, I'm passing around a sheet. Put down your name and your email. Please write it so I can copy it into my email list. And I will send you all these things. And now we're going to turn it over to Meredith Machen, who will moderate. She's the president.
Okay, well, I'm hoping that the microphones are working enough so that you can hear me. And excuse me for having my back to you. Thank you very, very much for coming on a Saturday morning to hear tips from the experts on how to lobby effectively. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works for good government and for civic participation. We really believe that your voice is important. And this is a citizens' legislature. It's one of the few in the country, or maybe it's unique in the country, in terms of allowing anyone to come into meetings and speak as citizens or as registered lobbyists. And we're going to hear more about how to register lobbyists, but I think at this point what I'd like to do is introduce the panel, and then we will fill in on some of the information. And I'd like you also to write your questions down so that they can speak first about the things that they think are important, and then we can ask questions. So, you know, if you have a question, just put your hand up and hand it to us in writing, or you can ask it, you know, at the end. We're not trying to, you know, of course, filter your questions. We want you to ask your questions, but I just wanted to leave time so that we can hear from the experts. I think all of us are prepared for a very, very new legislative session with new leadership and with lots of new members. I think we have 18 new members. But here today we have some veterans, and we have Senator Peter Wirth, who's from Santa Fe. He's been in the legislature since 2004, as I recall, first as House Representative and for Santa Fe, and then Senator for the last 3 terms. Is that right?
2 terms.
2 terms, okay.
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, Peter, I think most of you know, he's done a lot of very, very important legislation, and he's, how can I say it, persistent. Some of his legislation he has to work on for decades, or it seems like decades, in order to get it through, but he works very, very nicely with other legislators and gets them to understand the big picture. So I'm sure he's going to be mentoring the new folks who are coming into the legislature. Then we have Senator Sandra Rue, and you've served
Into my 2nd term.
You're into your 2nd term. Okay, good. I didn't realize I was going to be doing the introduction. Into your 2nd term, and he is from Bernalillo, and he basically works for good government as well. He sponsors some very, very important legislation. Another person who works across the aisle to try to get the best for the people of New Mexico. And of course, I want you to fill in on a specific agenda that you're going to be working on, your priorities. Next, I have Linda Siegel, who is also standing in for Juliana Coop, who was on the schedule for this morning but couldn't be here. And Linda is seen in lots of different kinds of committees, healthcare and education primarily, and she knows how to get things done. She is widely respected, not just because she represents lots of different organizations, educational and healthcare organizations and others, but because, you know, she really knows how to get bills through. And so we're going to talk a little bit with her about the whole process of being organized with your folks who are working on the same issues, and so on. So I think at this point, what I'll do is ask the, the panelists if they would go ahead and say more about themselves and more about their priorities. And then we'll talk about if you want to register as a lobbyist and so on. Is there anything, Dick, that I have forgotten?
Yeah.
Okay, and Dick is really the expert on this too. Dick Mason, who is our action chair, and he'll fill in where I forgot, and then Judy Williams also, who is passing around the sign-up sheet where you're going to print legibly. Thank you.
Jump right in, sure.
Sure.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks again to the League for doing this little seminar. I think this is the 4th or 5th time I have spoken, and it's always fun to kind of share some of the secrets to being effective in this building. It's one of the things that I've tried to do since I got here. A couple of things, there's a couple of folks I want to introduce in the audience. Senator Eichenberg is here. He's our new state treasurer, and I'll still call him Senator Eichenberg, but he's good tonight. And then Martha Romero is here. She's a member of the Community College Board. Also my mother-in-law, so I love and of course we've got former Karen Heldemeyer's here, former city councilor. Who else is here? Curtis, I think I got it. So, a couple things, and I'm really delighted that Senator Rue agreed to do this. He and I came into the Senate at the same time. We have, I think, we both consider the best seats in the whole Senate chamber. We get to sit next to each other. And I'm kind of over in the DMZ, as far into the Republican zone as you can get on the floor. But we're on the back row of the building, of the floor, and so you can really see everything that's going on. And we really do have not only a working relationship, but a solid friendship that's developed serving together. And I think what's neat about the state Senate, and I think one of the reasons I continue to do this, is that we haven't become Washington. It's not gotten so broken down that we simply can't talk to each other. The state Senate runs in mysterious ways. I've had bills that have only passed because I've had Republican votes. So it's not as partisan. We really work together, and there's a group of us in that chamber that work across party lines to do what we're there to do, which is to represent the best interest of the state of New Mexico. So I have, it's been fun doing this, and I told Senator Rue, he hasn't heard this yet, but over the years I've put together a top 10 list for citizen advocacy, and I'm going to go through it again, and I think Meredith mentioned it's up on the League website, but there's ways to get it out. We've tweeted it, and maybe it's not on the League website.
It's on lwvnm.org.
Perfect.
League of Women Voters, New Mexico, lwvnm.org.
So I'm going to go through my list and talk about each of these 10 points, and I think that will help you kind of understand a little better this process in this building. So number 10 on my top 10 list is do not be scared of the roundhouse, it's your building. And Meredith mentioned this. I've got it here. Yeah, these guys can take a look. This is something that I cannot stress enough. This is a very open chamber and open building, and you can walk in, you can come into the committee rooms, you can come into our offices. I always tell constituents in Santa Fe, and whenever I speak, you can walk down onto the floor of the two chambers before we start a session, and you can come right up to Senator Rue and visit with him about an issue. I can assure you, Linda will be there. And so I love Linda, but I would rather talk to all of you than I'm just teasing. But the lobbyists are down there. It's like bees on honey, working their bills. And this place is really accessible. When you come up to our offices, there are people wait for us and they learn where we walk and what routes we take, and they grab us, and you'll see people, you know, and again, if you don't engage and don't feel comfortable just taking control of the building, that's to your disadvantage. Number 9, understand what it takes for a bill to become law. And this may sound pretty simple, kind of basic civics, but it's super important because it's a heck of a journey. And so if you're advocating for a particular issue or a particular bill, and Chris and I were talking about some strategy, you've got to understand what it takes and where it's going to go. Typically bills are introduced these days just in one chamber. We used to, when I first got here, everyone ran double bills. We now have some rules, and double bills mean this identical bill in the House and identical bill in the Senate. We still do that sometimes, but it's now more the exception than the norm. But in order for a bill to make it through this process, it gets introduced, for example, a Senate bill. Senator Rue will introduce a bill in the Senate. It gets referred generally to 2 committees. There could be a 3rd committee. If it's got financial implications, it would go to Senate Finance. And so each of those committees generally have a hearing on that bill. And so if you're following a piece of legislation, you need to be very surgical and focus on the committee that the bill is going to. You don't have to lobby the whole legislature. You've got to focus on, you just got to get the right number of votes to move it out of that committee to the next committee. And I've always said, you feel good when you get a bill that has unanimous support, but all you need is a 1-vote majority, and it doesn't even have to be it can be to move a bill with no recommendation, which is one of the motions that are made. There's a do pass and a no recommendation. It doesn't matter, as long as you're moving in the process, that's what's important. So you'll go through the Senate side, the Senate committees, then it goes to the Senate floor, and understand that at all of these steps of the way, the bill can be amended. Any member can introduce an amendment to that bill. Once you're through the Senate, you start all over again on the House side. So the Senate bill goes over to the House side, the Speaker of the House will refer it to House committees, and then it goes down to the House floor. If there are changes on the House side, the bill has to be lined up. The Senate's either got to agree to those changes, or the House has got to back off on the changes, or you have a conference committee. And so it's a long journey, but you really need to understand, and I just can't encourage you enough to just stay focused on where the bill is. Number 8, use the tools on the legislature's webpage. It's www.nmlegis.gov. We actually have a terrific webpage. You can look up Senator Rue and figure out exactly what bills he has introduced. You can, you basically can even set there's a bill tracker feature on there, so it'll send you an email when a bill is being heard. And you can kind of get a general sense of a calendar of each committee, a calendar of the floor, and so as you're following your bill, look at that in the morning. We'll do questions, I think, once we get towards the back end.
nmlegis.gov.
Yeah, www.nmlegis.gov. And just go play around and check it out. It's also the way now that you are able to link into webcasting. And so this is something that really the 10 years I've been here, when we started, there were no cameras, there was no webcasting. You basically had to come sit in the chair if you wanted to participate. Now we've gotten much better, and the floor sessions are all webcast. Most of the committees are webcast, and you link right into the webcast, so you don't even need to come to the legislature. You can sit with your computer pad at home and just watch the committee, and as you see your bill getting closer, you can come in. And we've noticed, because this really is something in the 6 years that Sandra and I have done this, we've really noticed you have fewer people now in the committee rooms. But it doesn't mean that fewer people are participating. Just to give you an example, I met with a judge this week who said that he was following a whole string of Legislative Finance Committee hearings sitting in his chamber. They had a whole group in there, and they had a screen up, and they were following it all right there. So that all is accessible through the legislative website. Number 7, and this and Sandra can talk about this too, email is a great way to communicate with most legislators. I certainly, for myself, I use the legislative legislative email address. It's peter.wirth, W-I-R-T-H, at nmlegis.gov. And that generally, I try and, when you're in the heat of this process, I tend to have trouble sleeping. And so I wake up at weird hours, and you may get emails back from me at 4 in the morning, because I get up, crank all those email outs, and head off. But that is a good way to communicate. But you need to figure out, though, when you're targeting who are the votes that you need to have, you need to figure out how those legislators communicate with their constituent, what their preference is. Number 6, and this is important to speak whenever I speak in Santa Fe, I always have to stress this, a legislator's constituents are generally the best advocates. So if you are working on a bill with a group and you need Senator Rue's vote, having 50 people from Santa Fe show up in his office is, he'll listen. Some might not, but it's not as effective as having 50 of his constituents show up. And so I think that as you work on bills that have statewide impact, I've been successful because the groups that have organized have figured out that, if you want to have Senator Smith's attention, he's from Deming, and so when he gets input from folks from Deming, all of a sudden it just changes that. So that's an important piece. Number 5, and this one seems obvious, but I always need to stress it. Be courteous, and remember, your bill is one of thousands. I have only been physically assaulted once in this building. We have weapons in all of our committee rooms, and this is a building where you can conceal carry and sit in a room like this. You can do it on the floor, you can do it and so that's its own set of issues. But the only time I ever had someone that was absolutely out of control, he was a constituent, and it was a memorial. and he just felt so passionately about this bill, and it wasn't being scheduled in the Senate Rules Committee, and I was the vice chair of the Senate Rules Committee, and he just all of a sudden kind of lost it and got in my face, and it was wild to watch because the cameras are all on, people are watching us, and literally the state police just boom. So that's the extreme. But well, maybe it's not the extreme.
I can top that.
Oh, good. That's right. We've talked about it. Senator Rue can top that, so it's not the extreme. But it's important, though. I mean, again, we're trying to. This sitting on this side of this process. We're trying to do a whole bunch of things. Obviously, we've got our own bills. We sit on committees. I chair a committee, so I'm trying to coordinate the Conservation Committee in the Senate. And we've got strategy going on that involves the big picture, the little picture, and there's just a ton of stuff going on. And so, again, it's figuring out, how to work your bill, but not do it in a way that just becomes not courteous, let's put it that way. Number 4, bills usually take more than one legislative session to pass. And so this is another important lesson, and again, things take time generally. There are exceptions to that rule, but again, it's a very short process. This is the quote-unquote long session for 2 months. But what happens is we have no limits on the number of bills that members can introduce. I personally think that's not a great thing, and I've supported rule changes to limit the number of bills. But as a result of that, you just have this mass of legislation, and so figuring out how to get your bill through that whole process is not easy. And generally, it takes more than one session. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as these bills go through the process, they are subject to amendments at any stage from members. They're subject to public input. I've had bills that have gone all the way through, been vetoed, and then the next session we work with the executive and get the bill passed. So it just sometimes takes time. You got to be patient. Number 3, I talked a little bit about this one. A great place to meet legislators on the chamber floor before or after the session. Again, come down and visit us. Number 2, speak up at committee meetings. This, again, is something that I can't stress enough. It really makes a difference when people spend the time, and when I've got constituents, when I've got a vote coming up, and in the audience are a whole group of folks that have come and spent the time, and they stand up and express their point of view. It really makes, it's better than the same, again, no disrespect to Linda, but there's a group of people here that are paid a lot of money to be here 24/7, and they're the lobbyists, and we get to know them, and they're here for, maybe the amount of money can vary. I carry bills that seem to attract all these blue suits for the guys from New York. They have way too much money. But again, I see Julia Barnes sitting out there, and I'll just tell a fun story that's one of the neatest things that's ever happened to me with respect to this. And it was when I was in the House, and the girls' school was here, and some students were participating, and they were following a bill I was carrying that was dealing with emissions from coal-fired power plants, and we're the Energy Committee, and it was an early morning hearing. It's a very small room, and all the students got up really early. They came to the room, they sat down in the chairs, and then all the lobbyists started to come, and the room was too full. And so the attendants were literally telling people they could not come in. Well, the people they were telling they could not come in were the lobbyists. And so one of the lobbyists went and actually tried to tell the attendant that the students needed to be moved.
That wasn't Linda.
That was not. No. And so we kind of intervened, and that did not happen. And those students were great. They stood up and participated in that bill. And I just had, getting young people involved in this process is one of the best things that can happen. The bill to ban texting and driving that took me so long to pass for whatever reason. But last session, when it did go through, we had students. We had young people, old people, people all in between. And just having that kind of unanimous sentiment in support of the bill made a big difference. So the final thing, and then I'll let Senator Rue jump up here, is number 1, this top 10, count your votes and be targeted. And we talked a little bit about this as well. I can't stress this enough. There is a temptation to want to change the world and go and educate every single legislator, and there's just a whole bunch of things I never see because they never get through the committee process, the committees I'm on. And then there's things that don't get to me until I'm on the floor of the Senate. So again, if you're coming into Senate Corporations and Senator Wirth sits on that committee, you want to look at exactly who's on that committee, and you want to figure out where are the votes I need to move it out of that committee. And generally, if you come to me and I say, I'm going to vote for the bill, I'm going to vote for the bill. If I change my mind, which can happen, I'll let people know, but what you're trying to do is figure out folks that can get that information and count your votes. And so again, it's being super targeted. It's a heck of a lot easier. I mean, you'll find that it may be 1 or 2 votes that you're really focused on. And so it's an awful lot easier when you're being an advocate for a piece of legislation to be focused on those 1 or 2 votes than trying to, get everyone on the committee, or trying to get people who aren't on the committee. And also, on the other side of it, there are members that simply are not going to vote for your bill. And so you just let it go. There are things Senator Rue's not going to vote for. There's things Senator Wirth is not going to vote for. And so, once you know that, it's not worth pestering and lobbying and spending all your effort to try and change that vote. Just figure out where you need to go. So those are a couple of that's my kind of top 10 list, and I'm happy to answer more questions when we get there. And Senator Rue, I'm sure, can fill in some things from his experience.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'll try to get through this pretty quick because I'm more interested in what you all have to say in your questions. But I'm delighted to be here, and like Peter, very proud of my friendship with Peter. One thing, when I first got elected and was up here a little while, people would ask me, what surprised me the most? the thing that I didn't expect when I got up here, and I'll tell you what it is. It's how collegial it really is. I think a lot of us, when we're looking in at this from the outside, assume that we all get up here and it's just like this, you know. You're a Democrat, I don't like you, and this, that, and the other. It is so collegial, and I've developed lasting friendships that I'll cherish the rest of my life. You know, we have Senator Eichenberg, our new state treasurer. It's a small clique. You know, I dated his sister for a little while in high school. And Senator Wirth, we'll be sitting there. I love sitting next to Senator Wirth in the chamber and in committees, and he'll point to various people, say we went to law school together, and it's interesting how interconnected this all is, but it is very collegial, and that's one thing that you don't have to take a strategy of playing one of us against the other, because, you know, we may not agree on everything, but at the end of the day, we get over things, we may get our feelings hurt a little bit, but we move right on to the next thing, and we don't, if you're wise up here, you don't carry a grudge, you don't carry a chip on your shoulder, because at the end of the day, we all need to work together. A couple of things, I guess you talk about legacy thing. If I don't make it back up here this session, if something were to happen to me, I guess probably the thing that people might identify me most with is transparency and open government. And I've got some bills this year that I'll be working on too. I'd like to see state contracts actually on the state sunshine portal, where the public can see the contract, not just the purchase order, but the contract, and where they can actually perhaps see the proposal and bid sheets, so they can, for contractors and the public, this is taxpayer money. And as I say with all of these transparency and open government issues, it's not so much, I don't try to do this, it's not a gotcha kind of thing, but the more open and transparent these things are, people will tend to do the right thing. You can't change what's in their heart. There are a lot of people, you know, that will try to get away with things and this, that, and the other, but if they'll do the right thing because they know people are paying attention and looking, I'll take that any day. And that's what I try to do with this whole process. And Senator Wirth has been very supportive of everything I've done. And I'm in the DMV too. I sit on the border with the Democrats. And I've told people in the past, every time we get up there, the folks that do the seating arrangements, I tell them, don't ever think about separating me and Senator Wirth. I'll throw such a fit, you would not imagine. And that's just one thing that's very near and dear to me. And you know, I'll just go down a couple of these things. One thing that I want to touch on a little bit too, the point of contact for legislators. There's a lot of different ways to do it. As Peter said, a lot of times we'll get jumped in the hall when we're on our way to a committee or something, or sometimes people will give their card to an attendant while we're actually in session on the floor and ask us to come out. And that's all well and good, but that's not a good time to present something to us for the first time. The way to do that is try to catch us in our office and make some time. And then this is the other thing you really got to understand. It's different for every legislator. There are some legislators you will never find in their office. They tend to use their desk on the floor as their office. And I won't mention names, but you got to understand that. And then there are other folks like me. If I'm not in a committee or on the floor, I'm in my office. And I make it a point to get there early, and you know, I'm there late. So that's something else you have to educate yourself to. And folks like Linda understand that. She knows certain people, the best time to get them is on the floor before the session starts, when, as Peter said, it's open. Before we gavel down to start, you can come onto the floor. Sometimes that's where you have to make your pitch. For others of us, I'm in my office a lot. That's also a good time to catch me. So you have to understand this. In the hallway, it's not a good time, in my opinion, to try to present an idea or make a case when we haven't had a previous conversation. And then about your presentation, this is something else I think that's really important to understand. If you get me in my office, we're going to have some time. We're sitting down. Don't start the conversation assuming that I know what you know about this issue. You have passion for this. You can't wait to get into it. But sometimes you might ask a question, are you familiar with this, that, or the other? And I may be. And then we can jump right into the issues. But if not, you have to take me, you know, bring me back and start me where you are. You know, talk about what it is, who you are, who you represent, what you're trying to accomplish. You need to educate me a little bit, but don't jump in and start that conversation assuming that I know what you know. But ask some questions first. I may be well versed in the issue. The tools that you have available to you these days are wonderful. Again, you can go onto the state legislative website. You can track bills. You can find out where it is, where it's going next. You can look up and see if it's going to Corporations and Transportation Committee. You can pull up the members of that committee. You can get their office numbers. You can get their phone numbers, their email addresses. So that is a valuable tool for you. Instead of just drifting the halls here, you know, if you're going to plan this, and you should plan your work, that is a valuable tool. So you can track where these things are going. The other thing you can do, you need to do a little research on the legislators. You can go to the website and you can pull up, there's a search engine there where you can pull up all my votes on taxes, education. You put in a keyword and you can go back several sessions and see how I tend to vote on certain things. And that may give you a little bit of a heads up on how Senator Rue feels about, you know, allowing dogs in restaurants or whatever. And I supported it. So, you know, again, we have a lot of tools available now, and we as legislators do the same thing. We track the bills, we're trying to pay attention. And I have to go out and lobby other legislators sometimes to get them to vote for my bills. So utilize all the tools. And understand, again, the individuality of every legislator. We're all different. And, you know, where you get us, the conversation you're going to have with us, it's different. You got to talk to other folks that have some experience with us sometimes to understand those nuances. Speak up at committee meetings, again, excellent. Show up at the committees. The one thing you have to understand, and I've apologized to people in committees, and every committee is different. Sometimes you may drive all the way up from Albuquerque, you folks are from Santa Fe, but it's problematic. Sometimes you see a bill on the agenda that's going to be, you assume, heard that day. You get to the committee meeting, and you get through the whole thing, and all of a sudden the bill's not heard. Or the chairman will say, well, this bill, we're going to hear this down the road. We're not going to hear it today. You made the trip up there, and I have to tell you, there's no way you can know that in advance. The agenda will be posted on the website, but don't be too disappointed. You know, understand that that's the way this thing goes sometimes. You may make the trip up, you're all ready to go, you got everything all set to stand up and make public comment, and then you got to come back Friday to have another shot at it, and it may or may not be heard then. So patience is something you have to learn, not just year to year, but also, you know, that particular session. I remember when I first got up here, and Senator Wirth has been my mentor, I'd look at some bills and say, man, this is the greatest thing in the world. And he'd say, Senator Rue, this is the 6th year we've had this bill. I said, well, how in the world can anybody, and then I found out there are a lot of ways people can oppose the best bill in the world. The first time I lost a bill, I was ready to go out and I was ready to take on the world. I couldn't understand how people could support my bill. So you need to be patient. Courteous and respectful, you all are. I mean, we have some folks that just get so fired up that you have to just kind of take a deep breath sometime and be patient with us.
I want to hear your story about your...
And I can beat this.
Yeah.
It is an open building, and our leadership and many of us in the past feel that's something we're very proud of. People can walk in here, tourists can walk right in and go up in the gallery and sit in on our session, and that's wonderful. And and then there's a flip side to that. I had a situation, there was a bill in one of the committees, and there was a gentleman in the audience who was not real happy when I voted against this bill. So I went up to my office after the committee, and I was sitting there, and he came in and shook hands, and he sat down, and we started to talk about this bill. He began to get really aggressive about it, challenging my vote, and I explained it to him, and he just wouldn't let it go. And I said, well, you're really rude right now, and I hate bad manners. I've explained this to you, we've had the vote, and I don't appreciate just being challenged again and again and getting in my face. I've explained it to you. And he kept going on and on, so I said, well, I'm going to ask you to leave my office. So he stood up. This guy was a fellow that carried open. You can carry open. You don't need a permit to carry open. So this guy's got, a gun on his belt and a couple clips of ammunition around his feet. And when I first got elected, I kicked the desk a few times. I want to see how solid it was if I ever had to duck behind it. So that scared me to death. And so those are the kinds of, one thing I want to say really quick too, lobbyists. A lot of them get a bad rub. The way that I present this to people, lobbyists represent interests, whether it's business, industry, policy interest, whatever the case may be. the way I look at lobbyists is they serve a valuable purpose because they can come in and they understand really the nuances of this probably better than anybody else, you know, because have been at it for a while. They're succinct, they can get to the point, and they oftentimes represent groups of people who can't be in Santa Fe to make their case because in business interest perhaps they're working, you know, they got a business to run, they got payroll to make, they got their taxes to pay and everything else. So lobbyists serve a valuable function in that they can represent those people and they understand the processes and they can pretty succinctly deal with that. And then there are lobbyists and there are lobbyists. There are lobbyists that are hired guns, and then there are lobbyists that are more policy cause issues. You know, folks like Linda, I know that when she comes up and talks to me, she has a passion for what it is. She doesn't just take on stuff. You know, she's very, very passionate about what she does take on and what she does represent. So all of us have come to respect the fact that we know that she's speaking from her heart when she talks to us and not necessarily just because somebody, you know, signed her up and said, here, go up here. And I'm sure there are a lot of things she's turned down because, you know, she feels very strongly about what she believes in. So anyway, I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator, for that. Which leads into, why do you need a lobbyist and what does a lobbyist do? And I represent a lot of healthcare providers like nursing groups, and the chiropractor is one of Senator Wirth's favorite clients of mine because we're always trying to get him to vote a certain way that he doesn't really want to vote. And the Santa Fe Public Schools are one of my clients with Virginia v. Hill. The early childhood providers, private women-owned businesses. So I have quite a few clients that are really constituent and association type based. And they're not the kind of people who can come up here every day. If you're running a child care program, you just can't leave and come up for a hearing. And if you're a nurse working in a hospital or home health, you're not going to be able to come up here. So what I see lobbyists doing is really helping the client define the issues, decide what kind of legislation they want to do, and then keeping them informed. Because as both senators have said, it's not me coming and talking to them. I know that they do listen to me, but they want to hear from their constituents. So what I can do is let constituents in those districts know that, well, we really got to work on Peter Wirth for those chiropractors. So get all the Santa Fe chiropractors to go see Peter. And really coordinate. You've heard that the legislature doesn't work on normal time. It's legislative time. So a bill might be scheduled for a hearing at a certain time. Everybody's ready to come up. And I'll go as the lobbyist and check with the committee chair or secretary and say, well, do you really think this bill is going to happen? Or do you think you guys are going to stay on the floor for another 4 hours and we're not going to get to the hearing? So I try to find out these things, even to the point where I'll go, the chamber is going on, so it doesn't look like the bill is, that the committee is going to happen. So I'll call my clients and say, okay, I know your bill is scheduled, but be ready to get here within 1 hour, and I will call you to come instead of you coming up here and sitting for hours. And that works sometimes it doesn't work. But it's a way that I can help make their valuable time better used. And we also get the feel for a bill, how the legislators are responding to a bill. One of my jobs is I'll go talk to every single person on the committee, every single legislator on that committee, and try to find out, do you support this bill? Do you oppose this bill? Are you on the fence? And then that way I can tell constituents that you need to email this legislator, and you get your friends to email, and you need to try to persuade them to oppose or support the bill, whichever it is. And I can tell you that in many instances that really works. A few years ago when, I think it was the last year of the Richardson administration, they got this wild idea that they were going to combine all the healthcare boards under the Board of Medicine.
And Al Park, who's a legislator from Albuquerque, was crazy enough to carry that bill. And, you know, nurses of all the providers, they're just like adamant that they have their own board. I mean, everybody is, every healthcare practice is. But that they would not be under the Board of Medicine. And it was, quite honestly, a ludicrous idea. So I put the word out to the nurses. By the very next day, Al Park had received 400 emails. And so he called me into his office and he said, okay, I'm pulling the bill. Tell the nurses to stop emailing. So that kind of thing can work. It can also backfire, and it can also irritate legislators. I know with this chiropractor bill I've been working on for years.
It's coming again, isn't it?
Is she lobbying us?
Right
It's
now.
a really good bill. It's a very emotional issue, and it's very divided among the chiropractor community. So hundreds, if not thousands of emails were coming from out of state, which, you know, I have no control over.
From around the world.
From around, yeah, you all know, because you got those. And legislators were coming up to me and saying, you've got to stop this, it's just clogging up my email. And it's like, there's nothing I can do. These are not my people. I have no control over them. I don't know who they are. And of course, they were against the bill. So it can also not be a good thing to have all these emails happening. But as a lobbyist, it's so important to always tell the truth. I mean, I think that is certainly one thing that I can pride myself on when talking to legislators. You know, I'm going to be straight with them. I'm going to give them the position I have, for if it's a bill I want, why they should vote for it, and I'm also going to tell them, and usually they'll ask too, well, why would people oppose this? Why won't this work? And so I'll say, well, you're going to get opposition from this group because of this. And it's changed a lot since I started lobbying. I actually started coming up here in the mid-'80s when I ran a health and social service agency, Open Hands. And that's where I kind of learned the process and learned what you do, how you do it, watch things. And so in 1992, I started my own business to lobby for causes that I do believe in. Actually, a couple of lobbyist friends of mine have been trying to get me to work with them on the payday loans. And I said, no, can't do it. Because I do like to work for causes that I believe in. And it just makes me feel better about telling people this is a good idea, this is a good bill. As many of you know, I worked for years on the amendments to the Human Rights Act to add sexual orientation and gender identity. And that was one of those long bills. We started that bill in 1991. And it did not pass both chambers and get signed by the governor until 2003 when Governor Richardson came in. So there are things that you do have to keep coming back on to win people's hearts and minds. And it was still a relatively partisan bill, unfortunately. But in the House, we actually did have 5 Republicans who voted for the Human Rights Act amendment. So those are things you just keep coming, and you can't get discouraged because this is the process. And it's the best process in the world, although sometimes we just cannot believe what is happening. But it is the way that we change laws and make good laws. One of the things that I do, it's probably known that I'm a Democrat. Everyone knows that. All the legislators pretty much know your party affiliation. But I have spent a lot of time working with Republicans because most of my issues are not partisan. You know, gay and lesbian issues unfortunately have been. But most issues are just a matter of education and persuading people that this is the way to go. So it is very important to talk to people on both sides of the aisle, as we say. And I have some great experiences. I go in and talk to Senator Stu Engel, who's the minority leader in the Senate, and I just go into his office and sit down, and he tells me all these horror stories of the legislature in the 80s. And sometimes they'll support my bills, and sometimes not, but the same thing works for Democrats. So it's important to just be present with the facts and not be emotional about it. I mean, there was no bill probably more emotional for me than the Human Rights Act and then the Domestic Partner Bill. And I had to learn that I had to step back from my personal feelings when I was talking to legislators, because some of them would say not very nice things. But I think that has helped me win support from a lot of people who know that I'm not going to take it personally and move on. Some little tidbits I was saying when I first started. You would come up here, it was long before the website, and if you wanted a bill, you had to go downstairs to the bill room and get a copy. Some of you remember that. Get a copy of the bill, and that was the only way you could get it. But this website is just, it's opened it all up for everyone having the ability to have access. And I do these lobbying workshops all the time to my client groups, and since I represent a lot of healthcare providers, I go to the colleges and universities and do it for the classes of OTs and nurses, and talk about how easy it is now to really engage. And since they didn't know what it was before, nobody really knows that it's such a great thing and has saved saved a lot of time for all of us. I think you probably have a lot of questions, so I'll just sit down and wait for those questions.
Can I just ask one clarifying, if maybe you can address this, because I know it's an issue for us. I know both of you in the Senate, but the fact that they're changing leadership in the House and what that'll entail, particularly at the beginning of the session, that we won't know a lot of the structure. And I would.
I can talk a little bit because I, of course, served in that chamber when it was 45 Democrats and 25 Republicans, and the Republicans basically were as far out on the farthest island as you could ever get. And obviously things have changed. It was 37 Democrats, 33 Republicans. It's now exactly the opposite, 37 Republicans, 33 Democrats. They've elected Don Tripp as the Speaker of the House, a very respected member who I think a ton of. He's a very good guy. And Brian Egoff from Santa Fe is going to be the minority leader. What's interesting, and this stick to your question, as we sit here, no one knows where their office is going to be. None of that's going to be decided until opening day. No one knows what the committees look like. And the reason for that is, quite frankly, on opening day, there is a vote that to be elected Speaker, it's a vote of the full chamber. It's not just the Republican Party. And as we have shown in the Senate, just because you have a majority does not mean necessarily that that majority is all going to vote the same way. So hypothetically, if 3 Republicans were to switch and support Ken Martinez, you could have a Democrat sitting up there, even though the numbers are different. So they're being smart. I mean, Representative Tripp is being smart. You've got to be elected before you just assume a bunch of things. But everything's going to change. I mean, all the committees flipped. It's the first time in 60 years that the Republicans have controlled that chamber. And I don't think they really understand what they're in for, and quite frankly, how much power they have. The Speaker of the House assigns all the bills, and a bill, I think, the all-time record, Raymond Sanchez, I think, was 7 committee referrals for one bill. But you can steer bills to their death in a whole string of different ways. It's pretty much you have one person that's doing that in the House. It'll be all of us. Anyone that's running legislation is going to want to watch and take a look at what those committees look like. When the Democrats had 37 and the Republicans had 33, there were a whole string of committees that were 50-50. The Energy Committee was equal number Republicans, Democrats. The Water Committee was equal number of Republicans and Democrats. I would be surprised if you see that. The reason that was happening was to put a bigger majority on some of the, like the House Appropriations Committee. And I think one of the things that the Republicans, especially in the House, tend to do better than the Democrats is they all stick together. And so I think you're going to see, my guess would be you'll see majority Republican committees on all these committees. But it's a great question because it's a very different look than we've had before. One thing I will say is that I don't think, we've seen all these bills. The thing about it is the idea that somehow there's a whole bunch of new bills that are coming, they all get introduced in both chambers. So we've seen them before. I just think it's going to increase the focus on the Senate because you're going to see bills coming out of the House that have not come out of the House in 60 years. They've always been kind of held in the committees. And now those most likely